This is the Galaxy A54, and it's Samsung's latest iteration of their A series, and unsurprisingly, it's the best one yet. But what is surprising is how close it gets to a flagship experience at half the price of an S23. I've had the A54 for a little over a month, and these are my honest thoughts on Samsung's latest mid-range phone. This is Jake's Space, let's talk A54. At first glance, the A54 looks like a member of the S23 family. Notably, the camera bubbles on the back that were included on the entire flagship series are present here. Samsung seems to be including this design across the board, with the budget A14 and the slightly more expensive A34 sharing the same look. What is not present on those phones is back glass, which is new on the A54 this year. The A54's Gorilla Glass 5 is glossy, where the flagship's is matte, which makes my awesome graphite example here an all-time fingerprint magnet. The rounded edges of the phone are plastic, which have a metallic finish, as Samsung calls it, which is really just a matte texture. I understand that they had to cut costs somewhere, but the plastic frame really hurts the feeling in hand of the phone, taking it from a B with the glass on both sides to a C at best. But most other phones in the US don't even have the glass back, so we'll have to give Samsung a pass here. Moving to the front of the A54, we find a 6.4-inch 120Hz AMOLED display that really is the star of the show. I think that 6.4 inches is the sweet spot for a smartphone. It's big enough that you have a whole lot of screen real estate and you're able to see a lot of stuff at once without being so big that you have to hold the phone with two hands at all times. The display itself is great. With a maximum brightness of 1000 nits, it's easily bright enough to see even in direct sunlight, and the 120Hz refresh rate makes it very smooth. It's a really good display. I would say the only real difference between it and a flagship display like you would find on the S23 is that maximum brightness. The S23 series can get up to 1750 nits, and it's like high brightness mode. So that's going to be a little bit brighter in those extreme situations, but those situations are pretty rare, and I never ran into any problems with brightness on the A54. One other thing that the flagship displays are able to do is vary that refresh rate. So they have the LTPO displays where they can, go down to 60 hertz or even lower. I think the S23 Ultra can get down to like 10 hertz. The display on the A54 is at a constant 120 hertz, which isn't as efficient, but again, in a phone this price, you're not used to even having 120 hertz here in the US, so that's really great. Other than that, you're basically getting a flagship quality display, and design is definitely a positive note for the A54. Performance on the A54 is solid for a phone at this price point. Obviously, at $450, it's not going to have the flagship, top-of-the-line Snapdragon processor that the S23 series has, but most people don't need the astronomical headroom that a flagship processor is going to provide. And the performance of the A54 is still above average. To get specs out of the way, the A54 is powered by Samsung's Exynos 1380 processor, coupled with 8GB of RAM and either 128GB or 256GB of storage, which is expandable via a micro SD card slot up to 1TB. Like I said, the performance is really not an issue here on the phone. There are some occasional stutters, just a tiny bit of lag, if you're switching between apps. It does only have 6GB of RAM, so it can be a little tough to multitask. But once again, as I say in every video, I'm a pretty big power user, so most people will probably be able to expect really good performance here on this phone. One area where the performance could be improved is in the fingerprint reader. In addition to being a little bit on the slow side, it is accompanied by a terribly choppy animation, which really makes it feel even slower and is honestly the worst part of this phone in my use so far. It has already been improved by one software update. It's better than it was, but I would like to see it improved further because it really hurts the experience overall. I'm not really a gamer, but I did download Asphalt 9. It seemed to run pretty well. I think it's a pretty intensive game. I kind of used it as a benchmark on phones in the past, and it runs pretty well. Like I said, obviously you're not going to have the extreme high-end processors that you find on a flagship, but for day-to-day usage, for what most people use their phones for, social media, that kind of thing, this phone is going to be more than enough for that. Now we arrive at the mid-range phone's nemesis, the camera. The A54 has a triple camera setup consisting of a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide, and a 5 megapixel useless macro camera. As with other things, the photos that the A54 produces are good, but they're not on the same level as a flagship. Samsung's trademark vibrant processing is very much present here on the A54, with the phone producing very bright and colorful pictures with some very strong sharpness added to them. Some people really like this style, and that's totally fine with me. It's not personally my style, but obviously there are some people who like this, or else Samsung would stop doing it. So to those people, you're really gonna like this camera. The phone is capable of up to 4K 30 video. Once again, it's good. It's not on a flagship level. It doesn't have the same presence is really the only way I know how to describe it. It just doesn't feel as high quality as something you would get off of a flagship phone. But there's nothing wrong with it. It's much better than the Motorola Edge that I reviewed. And at this price point, I think this is about as good as you're gonna get, other than maybe a Pixel. But that is another video that should be coming soon. Once again, if you're in the market for this phone and you've never had a flagship before, I think you're gonna find this camera to be a great upgrade from what you're using right now. And finally, some other things that didn't quite fit into the other categories. I love that the A54 has an always-on display. It's not a deal breaker for me to not have an always-on display. I use a 13 Pro Max that doesn't even have it, but it's really nice to see it here at this price point. The Pixel 6a and 7a both have the AOD, but the Motorola Edge I talked about earlier does not have that. So it is nice to have that feature here. Unfortunately, the A54 does not have wireless charging, which the just announced Pixel 7a does, but it's not, again, at this price point, not the end of the world. It does have a pretty large 5,000 milliamp hour battery. I never really had any battery issues in my usage. It's pretty strong battery life on the A54. It does have decently slow 25-watt charging. Of course, the 7a only has, I think, 18-watt charging. And then, of course, there are some other like OnePlus phones that have faster charging, but they're hard to find here in the US, so that's no big deal. And once again, I'm not a huge fan of Samsung's One UI software. That's just a personal preference for me. It's totally subjective what you like. So if you're already a Samsung fan, you're gonna like this. If you're coming from something else, you might try and demo it first to see what you think about the software. But it is strong software. It's the same One UI experience that's present on the flagship phones. There's not anything that's missing here, which is a selling point of getting an A54 because they get the full One UI, whereas the cheaper phones get One UI Core, which is missing some features. So that's the A54. It's a mid-range phone that is pushing the envelope of what a mid-range phone is. I think it's a really solid phone for the price. The only things I'd really change on it were maybe like metal rails would feel really nice in hand, though most people are going to use a case anyway. And again, that fingerprint animation is awful. It's really hard for me to use. But overall, a really great device. So the question becomes, should you buy one? And the answer is, some people should. If you're a Samsung purist and you're looking for a really great deal and you don't want to spend flagship money, this is the phone for you. If you've got another A-series phone or even an older S-series phone, like if you're using a S6, S7, S8, you can probably move to the A54, save yourself some money going towards instead of getting a flagship, and you're gonna still get a really great experience, and I think you're really gonna like it. If you're not a Samsung purist, if you're coming from a Motorola or an LG, if you've still got an LG, I would really look at the Pixel 7a compared to the A54. I'm going to have a video about the 7a as soon as I can get my hands on one, so be on the lookout for that. But there are some things that the 7a is going to be able to do better. First off, if you're not a Samsung software fan, Pixel software, in my opinion, is much better. I just prefer it. But of course, like I said, some people prefer One UI. It's just not for me personally. Second of all, the Pixel cameras are going to be better. That's just how Pixels are. They have really great cameras. And of course, there are the Pixel exclusive features like the call screening, that kind of stuff that people really like about the Pixels. They're only going to be available there. But it's also more expensive than the A54 and isn't going to have probably as good a battery life. I know my 6A, my 7 Pro really don't have the world's greatest battery life, whereas the A54 has pretty good battery life. But that's for a whole nother video. Kind of got on a tangent there. What I mean to say is you got to weigh your options. If you're not a Samsung purist, there's a really strong chance that you might like the 7a better. So I would wait, first of all, watch my YouTube video when it comes out, and see if you can go and demo the devices somewhere at a carrier store or a Best Buy or something like that. But I am interested to hear your thoughts on the A54, on the 7A, on anything really. I'd love to hear you down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.